If you're into retro gaming, you might have noticed how people are going back to the older CRTs. Some people are actually spending top dollar on them, especially if they're big Sony Trinitron models. But also if they're tiny? Yeah, for some reason people go out of their way to pay insane amounts for these PVMs from Sony and other manufacturers. But that's beside the point. This one didn't cost nearly as much when I got it years ago, and I keep it mainly when I need a smaller composite monitor on the bench when I'm testing older gear. I have the smaller 9-inch black and white model, which is in my opinion too small for serious gaming. And I just can't wrap my head around the fact that people are paying hundreds of dollars for a 9-inch monitor. I also have a bigger 14-inch color monitor, which I got for like $10, and even though it has some burn-in because it was used as a security monitor in its past life, it really has a nice picture and decent sound. Still, not worth the money people seem to want for them nowadays. I mean, just get yourself a regular cheap 20-inch CRT, and depending on where you live, you might be able to just get one for free. And if it's not in a terrible condition, chances are the picture is going to be just fine for retro gaming. Now, that's not to say that I don't like smaller monitors, quite the contrary. You might even say I have somewhat of a fetish for them. I have a couple of these radio TV combo units I've gotten from auctions or while thrifting for very cheap, so I thought you might appreciate seeing them because they're quite fun and surprisingly functional. Obviously, you can't watch TV on them because analog television doesn't exist anymore, at least here where I live. But there are things I still use them for on a daily basis and also occasionally, just for fun. Because yes, you can actually use them for gaming. It's not very practical and it's kind of dumb, but I guess there are also dumber things you can do in life. If you go back through my video catalog, you'll actually see some of my earliest videos were on these things because I find them cool. And yeah, they got no views at all. This was back when I was still making shorts and silent videos, known among historians as the early works of Schwabeck or EWS. I actually speed ran SMB1 on it. I almost threw it out of the window because how frustrating it was, but I've managed to make it to the top 50 in the PAL any percent category. Pretty sick. So this Crown portable TV is actually pretty cool. It has a nice radio actually. It picks up FM signals very nicely, and even though it only has a mono speaker, it actually sounds like 10 times better than those cheap Chinese pieces of crap you get nowadays.
Bio pjevan i na engleskom i na švedskom jeziku. Objavili su nadalje dosta extended playova. 2016 je jedan od njih se zove California Airport.
It has a 5-inch black and white tube, which really does look quite nice, although that kind of depends on what kind of a signal you're feeding it. So what can you actually hook up to this thing? Well, any game console or computer which outputs RF signal really. So you're kind of limited to older consoles, but surprisingly that still includes consoles from the late 70s, the 80s, and even the early 90s. RF was a surprisingly popular way to hook these things up since many older TVs didn't actually include a composite video input. But as composite and other video inputs became ubiquitous, the game started having more visual fidelity and higher resolutions, RF stopped being the default. Anyway, we'll hook up a couple of compatible consoles to these things and just have fun, see how it all works. This Crown portable TV has a standard RF input, and after hooking up your console, you'll have to tune it to an appropriate channel. Most consoles like Atari and Nintendo output to VHF channel 3 or 4, but Sega Mega Drive outputs to UHF channel 36. After tuning in your TV, you'll usually have to fiddle with some vertical, horizontal contrast settings to get the picture looking, how it should, or at least close to that, and we're gaming. Honestly, this is not half bad, especially for these older games. They look quite good on black and white because their color palettes were so limited, and many of them actually were designed to be played on a black and white screen. Atari actually has this button for switching between color and black and white. Also, some consoles output a really fuzzy RF signal, like this old Atari 2600. Yeah, this is why I also have a modded composite unit as well, but the picture on these ones has always been just meh. You could also hook up an old computer like a Commodore, Spectrum, Atari, which I've certainly done in the past, and I mean, it's barely usable, given how illegible the text looks on these tiny screens, although it kind of made me feel like I'm using an SX64 or one of those luggables from the 80s with a tiny screen. And I mean, I don't know, if the space was really of concern and if you really wanted to play these games on a CRT, I guess this would be better than nothing. Plus the nostalgia factor, I mean, it's up there. I also have this old Soviet one, which actually has a bigger screen, but it unfortunately doesn't work. I think it was used as someone's parts machine. It still looks cool as frig. But these are not actually machines I use the most because my daily radio, the one I turn on every single morning, is this absolutely gorgeous JVC radio. Apart from having a good radio and great sound, it also has a decent cassette player. Now, I'm not a huge cassette guy, I'm not quite Tecmo yet, but I do have a soft spot for some specific tapes, most of the ones I remember listening and having as a kid.
Ja, najwiesztia wiesztica.
Oče, majčice, gdje ste? Pomozite!
Sadovka.
Now that's what makes you into a man here where I live. You might say, that's cool and all, but this thing doesn't have a TV. But that's very wrong. Oh yeah, this thing has like a 3-inch black and white screen underneath this cool little shutter, and it's possibly the cutest thing I've ever seen. Unfortunately, getting an RF signal into it is a bit more complicated. It has these screw terminal things for connecting an external antenna, so you have to use this weird VHF, UHF, FM adapter, and while I did get the signal, the picture was just kinda awful. But I wouldn't necessarily call any of these things boomboxes because they just don't really have the girth, size, and the form factor of a real ghetto blaster. But I've recently picked up something that fits that description quite nicely. Now that's something you could swing over your head and play Peter Gabriel and watch it on MTV while you're at it. This is a proper beast of a unit with some pretty nice features for the time. Dual cassette decks, noise reduction, equalizer, and of course a freaking 5-inch black and white CRT tube, which makes this one of the coolest little boomboxes I own. I got it from an auction for around $30, and it came from a reliable seller I know personally, and he turned it on and confirmed that it was working, and it indeed was. Now, one reason I really wanted to get this is because from the pictures I could see these inputs here, and what's funny is these are of course stereo left and right inputs, but because the white block has gotten kinda yellow, I thought just perhaps this was a composite video in, and this thing had a color monitor. It was kind of stupid to think that, but still. Again, it has a pretty decent sound. I can't really elaborate on the technical details because I'm the furthest thing away from an audiophile you could imagine. My hearing really sucks also. I wanted to see what the TV looked like, so I hooked my Nintendo up to it, and it looked and sounded pretty awesome. I'm sorry about the flicker, this is not visible in person, this is something that happens when you film CRTs due to refresh rates not being the same. So I wanted to try some of my other consoles with an RF output, for example Super Nintendo. How about Genesis, or Mega Drive as we call it here in Europe? Again, I had to retune this thing since Mega Drive actually outputs its signal at a different frequency. Also, for viewers who've never heard how Sonic sounds in PAL territory, well, my condolences to you. I mean, can you imagine that I've actually went through life thinking that this is the correct speed this game is supposed to play at? It wasn't until like much later I've seen and heard the NTSC version playing at the right speed. Crazy. This is also why some other games in this video sound different than you're probably accustomed to. I'm not gonna go into detail, but it has to do with the difference between the PAL and NTSC format. I also do understand you could technically take a whole bunch of converters and probably hook like a PS5 to this thing, but I just wanted to limit myself to things that output RF natively. I also don't even want to imagine what an HDMI signal would look like on these tiny screens. So is there any point in doing this? Absolutely not. Is it practical? Not really. Enjoyable? Well, a little bit actually. And it's so freaking awesome. It's one of those things, where the sum of all of the parts is greater than the individual components. I mean, again, we're gaming on a boombox. That's pretty awesome in my book. Thank you so much for joining me in this silly little adventure. And if you like this video, you might want to consider subscribing. I do these videos twice a week. Computers, repairs, overviews, consoles, all sorts of things really. Also, if you'd like to have early access to my videos, feel free to join my Patreon. You can do so for as little as $1 a month, or more if you'd like. Also, if you have experiences with these tiny CRTs, please share them in the comments. Thank you so much, and I'll see you again soon. Cheers.